We also got two girls who were initially named Big Debbie and Little Debbie.
I didn't call them that. You call them that.
All right, guys, so we thought that some more goat content would be more fitting as we are Goat Daddy's farm. So we pulled, if there was a goat mama, Debbie would be it. So we pulled Debbie Webster from Whispering Pines Farm up in Seneca, South Carolina. We recently, you guys probably saw the earlier video where we went and purchased 3 goats from her. We got a new herd sire, Machete, and we also got 2 girls who were initially named Big Debbie and Little Debbie.
I didn't call them that. You call them that.
And then what Jonas is behind the camera, we named them Brittany and Tiffany. So that's all on our Facebook if you want to check that out, the reason behind that. But Debbie is staying down here. She's actually here for an agritourism conference, and we wanted to have her come by and see the farm, get some of her brain, and kind of tell her anything that we've learned along the way. And also just there's no camaraderie. You know, all the other people are talking, and I feel like all the goat farmers don't have a chance to actually get together. I never meet other goat farmers. I never meet people that have done this before. So why isn't there some kind of connection between the goat farmers here in South Carolina? So that's kind of what we're doing right now. She's been here. She got here Monday, and she's here at the B&B, staying at our B&B. And so we're wanting to get out some content and kind of talk about some stuff. I told Debbie I needed to open her head up and pour all the information that she learned in the 20 plus years. How long have you been doing this?
Yeah, probably 25.
25 years that she's been around goats. Just get everything she's ever seen and put it all in one video in like 15-ish minutes. So yeah, that's what we're doing today. And I've got just a few questions, my questions that I want to ask. And then also, you guys comment below. Maybe we'll go up to visit Debbie and do another video with her in the future. And if there's any comments or questions that other people have, we can go over those while we're there too. So that'll be kind of what we're doing. And then the first question, because I always forget my stuff.
You know, you had a better lead-in was how would you start someone, or why are there not as many dairies? And I think that is a good lead-in to if we were going to start. I think the reason why there aren't that many goat dairies is I don't think a person needs to start out, I'm going to have a goat dairy.
Yeah.
Because I think it's too hard to start that way. I think it's always good to start in something small and be good at that, be a good steward of what you have, and then grow from there.
And that's what you were. So when you first started, you were doing this for yourself. Like this was.
Yeah, we ended up with a failed 4-H project goat that was a bottle baby, and they found like, wow, that's hard. We don't want to do it. And then we had one goat, and she needed a friend, so we got another goat, and then it just multiplied from there. We were breeding for pets, and we just, you know, we had a horse farm, and the goats got along fine with them. I think we noticed right away that bottle babies had a hard time figuring out that they're goats and not humans. And, you know, because when you keep them in the house and you keep them in the yard and they don't know that they're actually goats, and what does a goat do? And then my oldest daughter had stomach issues, and someone said, well, you got goats. Don't you know that goat milk can fix all your stomach problems? And I thought, all right. And she's probably 6 and had some stomach issues. And I said, well, I guess I'm going to milk a goat, you know. And we started that. And then we realized, and I think this is the natural progression that people should go, maybe not essentially like that, but the progression went that we had what they used to call briar goats. You know, it's just it's an unregistered goat that maybe isn't a real dairy type, but, you know, they have babies that have milk. And some people don't realize you must breed the goat because, you know, that's how it works. Yeah. You know, God doesn't create anything that doesn't just happen. You know, it has to have a purpose, right? It tells someone, you know, you have kids, right? How do you not know?
Right.
You know, your wife just didn't all of a sudden start spewing milk out. You know,
a milk goat.
It's how it happens. It's not a certain age, you know. So anyway, we started milking those goats, and, you know, all right. And you know, I think we probably have had goat milk ever since, and never went back. You know, and because why? You know, we didn't have a cow at the time, and you know, the United States is way behind.
Right.
Because every country in the world knows that families can survive off of goats or sheep, whatever they're, you know, there's certain countries they're all about sheep and other countries are all about goats, but most of them have small ruminants to feed their family. And they get that because the cows cost too much to feed and they make too much milk, and it becomes more of a stressor than a help. The other thing is small ruminants, sheep and goats, have multiple babies. And that way you can increase your flock pretty quickly, and that's how people grow that flock, and it's not that hard. So I think if a person started out with some goats, I would say what I would do differently if I was starting out. If I knew I wanted milk, I would get dairy goats.
Okay.
Because the ones that aren't dairy goats, you're wasting a lot of time and effort on something that wasn't designed to do that.
Right.
And, I've watched y'all milk today. You've got great udders, good udder health, good teat placement, great suspensory ligaments, good attachments. Everything about it is just first class. They're all in good shape. My girls are happy, and it makes me happy.
Yeah.
So, and you have dairy type goats. If you have good genetics, you can milk fewer goats and have more milk. So you have less feed, because what's going to happen is if you get started, you're going to fall in love with every goat, and then you're going to have maybe some non-essential milkers. Or they're not
or
milkers,
15.
or however many, and then, because you love them all, and that's okay. When you first get into any kind of livestock, your first babies and your firstborn, they're family. If you watched them born on your farm, that's meaningful. And it's really hard to say, I'm going to go hardcore. Nobody ever starts out hardcore.
Right.
I mean, if you do, it's probably the dad,
and
he's being a meanie head, and he gets outvoted, and so then they stay.
You don't eat Bambi.
You don't eat your firstborn. Everyone knows that. And hopefully you'll have girls being born.
Right.
Because then that works in the dairy. And then at some point you can evolve and get to the point where you're a little more realistic. I do a class called From Pets to Production. And it doesn't mean that you're going to sell every drop of milk. But what we did is we got better goats. We had a lot of milk, and then all of a sudden we had more than we could use. So I started doing cheese making and learned from a lot of people. And then I had fun making cheese because I had extra. And so then what I did was, because I wasn't a licensed dairy at the time, and I had clientele coming in because we had a riding academy, so I always had tons of people coming in, try my cheese.
Right.
And we had talked about Evan Evans, and she's one of the main people that were started goat dairies in South Carolina. And I was good friends with her, and she told me, she said, Debbie, I gave away more cheese than I ever sold for the first 5-10 years.
Just
or something
learning
like
how to
that.
make it.
Just learning how to make it, because you make mistakes, and it's like when people are learning to cook. Not everybody's all about what you've cooked.
Right.
It's like and now we do microwaves. But the cheese is slow food, and it's a good thing. So I think that's the way to start. And you start with family and friends, and then build your skills and hone your skills. And you guys have gotten where you're selling so much fluid milk. You don't have enough milk to make cheese, and you have plenty of customers. You're talking about how do you get customers? If you can do a consistent product, that's what people are looking for. When most people start making cheese, they're not doing a consistent product. They're trying the cheese du jour, and because it's fun. I do cheese making classes, and I had a lady that you take 1 gallon of milk, you get 1 pound of cheese. Well, she took that pound of cheese, and that's not a lot. A pound of cheese is nothing. And she took little muffin cups and put it in muffin cups and then mixed them and had a taste of like 10 different cheeses, so it's like a spoonful essentially of everything.
And so when did you go, what was it? So you went from the Breyer goats. What was the next breed of goat that you went to when you said, I want to get dairy goats?
I think we actually moved into Saanens, just because no, let me take that back. It was Nubians.
Okay.
And then Saanens, and then the complication is when you have two very diverse breeds that have fairly different nutritional needs, and they're made differently and they look different.
Right.
And then you need 2 bucks. And it was all right because we're going to keep the 2 bucks together until breeding season. So that worked. And then, we just went forward with that. And I think we always had Nigerians because we had them at first because they were great to sell for pet goats. And then we advertised what great milkers they were, and that was probably counterproductive because anyone ever want to get them. And there was like a family with 6 kids and these very large people, and they want to get a Nigerian because that poor little goat can feed our family. And I'm thinking, oh my gosh.
You want 15 of them?
And she's going to have 5 or 6 babies.
Right.
And feed your family, and that's not very realistic.
And so that was my thing. If I could go back and start all over, I never would have started out with Nigerians. And we have a lot of people that come to us and they say, we've got kids, we've got little kids, and we just want Nigerians because we don't want them to be able to hurt the kids. Do you ever worry about a Nubian or a Saanen hurting a child?
No, I take the people out there and I said, here's some things to think about, okay? So, like goats aren't really leash trained. They can be.
Right.
But so if you want to hold a Nigerian, you're holding a collar near your ankles, and maybe your 5-year-old can do that.
Right.
But usually every family gets these things started thinking the kids are going to take charge.
Right.
And you know who's actually doing it?
The parents.
Mom and dad.
Yeah.
They're doing it the whole time. So it's not always that way. But you do want to include the kids. And, dairy goats are very gentle and very calm. And they're not like these vicious maniacs that are, dripping drool and biting and all that stuff. They're not like that.
Right.
And I try to tell them they're not as big as you think, and they're calmer. Take a look at dogs. Would you rather have a Chihuahua or a Great Dane?
Right.
Who is slower?
Right.
Who is more, laid
calm,
back?
laid back, easygoing. And so as far as output, input and output, how much a goat is eating and how much is coming out of it, I've never really seen a difference in a Nubian or a Nigerian. Like there's maybe a Nubian's got a little bit more pee, there's a little bit more moisture in the bedding if you've got a holding area where they're peeing in. I feel bad selling a Nigerian to someone if they're using it for milk. Just because it is I know that they're going to fail. Good friends of ours insisted on getting 3 Nigerian babies. And they came back to me the following year and they said, we're so excited, they're about to have babies. They said, this isn't even enough milk to feed one of us. And they were still having to go to the store after purchasing 3 Nigerians. All 3 were in milk. They were still having to go to the store and buy milk. And I said, that's the reason I told you guys, go with a mini Nubian at the minimum for a family. But really, like, my preferred for a family is a Nubian. Yeah. Like a Nubian is the perfect goat, and it's not a lot to bite off. I saw quite a few Nubians at your farm that you're using for production. Like these are production goats, and you're depending on them to produce milk for your farm. Yeah. And I don't think that there's a big difference from them producing milk in a backyard. Nobody's going to be flooded with milk from a Nubian in their backyard.
No, someone goes, what am I going to do with all the milk? I said, I've never had that problem. Yeah. And we make a lot of milk. And most individuals, they don't have enough milk. And once you start, maybe you got enough for your coffee with your Nigerian. And then if you have a Nubian, maybe you have enough, for breakfast or for cereal. But you need multiple animals to make enough to make cheese. Yeah. When you ever hit that point where you're making cheese, you need a lot of milk. And then you're going to maybe do yogurt. Maybe you're going to do kefir. And it's endless, all the things you can do, and you're never going to have enough milk. Right. So you might as well, if you're going to have X amount of individuals on your farm, it would be great if you had enough that you would have some volume where you could do what you want to do instead of, I got to wait till next year while I have enough milk. Right. The other thing is, people talk about the feed milk conversion rate. So a Nigerian doesn't really need that much grain, and they're probably going to make the same amount of milk whether they have the grain or not. Yeah. And that's the plus. Problem still is it's a great ratio, because if you don't have to feed grain, that's an expense you don't have. But what if she's only making 16 ounces? Now, people don't know what 16 ounces is.
Go fill up the water.
Yeah,
Go fill up
your water bottle is 16 ounces. That's all you're going to get for all the effort that you're doing, the cleaning, the pre-dip, post-dip, all the different products you do in the milking them out, and you strip them out, and you're thinking, I better not strip them out too much, because that's going to be most of what my yield is right there.
And you might only milk them for 10 months out of the year, and a lot of people will stagger the milking and think, I'm going to be okay. Maybe 2 months I'll have the overlap where I'm just milking one goat. But do you want to waste your time? I wasted so much time because I was milking those 2 Nigerians, and I was using the same milk pail setup that I'm using now for all of our goats, and I was just wasting time because I was having to do the same cleanup and everything, and there was no difference. And in my opinion, the larger goats are a whole lot easier to take care of. They can't get out of the fences that the Nigerians can. They're not as mischievous as Nigerians, and Nigerians are like dogs. They are like a dog. They're going to follow you. They're going to break out. And what is it for? It's for almost nothing. Yeah. So unless you're breeding pets, I only ever recommend Nigerians for pets. For dairy, unless you're a single person living in an apartment, and you're going to try and put it in the bathroom, which I don't think any goat person would recommend, I would not get a Nigerian at all. Definitely like the Nubians and the larger breed goats. So why do you think that there's so few goat dairies? Like, what was the process? You had all these goats, you're providing for friends and family, and then you said, okay, I want to sell to the public. That's a brave step.
Well, it didn't exactly I want to do that, but I told my husband, I said, all right, we have a problem. We've reached a breaking point that we either have to sell some beloved goats or go one step further and go into production and be able to sell legally, because it's not like we were a goat dairy at that point. We were just having fun, you know, and everybody was enjoying it with us. It was a big community thing, and we all liked it, and I was just experimenting. And then I said, you know what? I think actually we either back off, sell a bunch of them, I don't really do that, or we push forward and go ahead and commit to doing a dairy. Right. And, we all, we talked about it and decided to go forward, and we called our state guy and said, hey, there's a lot of things you don't know when you get started, and we were doing everything clean because we were drinking it ourselves. Right, it was our milk. It was our source, so we were doing a good job.
Your quality assurance. It's about the best quality assurance that you can get.
So, we're giving it to our children. Yeah. So we said, hey, can you just test it? He said, well, you're in a barn, it's a dusty environment and all this, milking by hand. It's never going to pass, and so he takes it and it's passed with flying colors. So we were doing a clean job. We knew that. And then when we started getting more animals, I think I was hand milking like 20 of them, and had the greatest grip ever. And I don't know, I was, it's still fun, oddly, at that point. And, I could get other people to help. And the hand milking is people don't have a knack for it. They got to learn how to do it, and it's not a strength issue. It's a technique, and once they learn that, they can get better at it. And so we got milking machines, and boy, it's like one of those things. Like, what was I thinking? You know, and so we did the whole thing, and we built a dairy, and the inspector helped us.
That's what I was about to say. That's what I was about to say.
And we wanted to do everything right because we didn't know this was a new thing. How do you do this? How do you do that? And he was a retired dairyman, and he's working for the government, and he just helped us tremendously. Not all dairy inspectors are that helpful,
right?
But I think sometimes if you approach them in a tone that makes them feel like it's being you're bringing them in, and we really want to learn, and we don't want to do anything wrong, and how would you do it, or if your family was starting it, how would you do it, and so we had a lot of help, and we built it just like you said. And then, and right now, we are selling products like crazy.
Right. And so you're in Greenville, too, so you've got this foodie capital. So, like, when I'm talking to you about selling cheese and milk, or cheese, you're talking about selling it to chefs, and it's going to restaurants and stuff like that, which is
and
pretty
grocery
awesome.
stores. And I could, a lot of people say, why don't you just go ahead and jump through the hoops to go to Whole Foods and everywhere else? And I don't want to do that.
Right.
Because you got this third-party audit. And yes, we make a product good enough, and we're making it so it's the same. You get it today, it's the same tomorrow, and that's what they want at the stores, so that they know what it's going to be. And then when someone goes in the store, they see the label and they grab it. And I probably make 10 different hard cheeses. There's probably 10 or more soft cheese varieties. I would do too much, but it's like the creative thing. Yeah, try something different. A lot of people were trying to copy my soft cheeses, and so there's one time I wanted to try something different. I wanted to try something that was, there's superfoods, and there's things that are, draw people in. I want to make something that no one could replicate.
Keep you alive
and
forever,
so I did a turmeric cheese, and people are still talking about it, and it looked like butter. And I did 6 different kinds of peppers, and it looked like butter. And I actually I dried it out and made a block out of it, so it had to be cut into squares, and it looked like butter. So I made a Brazilian chimichurri rub and sprinkled it across the top.
That's awesome.
Fresh herbs and stuff. And
this is just you doing something, and it tastes awful, so you change one thing about it. And that's why they call it artisan cheese, because you're
it's nothing that tastes awful.
Yeah. Well, like one thing you don't like the way it tastes, so you change it until you like the way it tastes, and then you're like, okay, I'm going to sell this.
Artisan means that you're doing small batches by hand.
Okay.
Farmstead means that you're using your milk to make your cheese.
So you're farmstead, artisan, homegrown the whole way.
Awesome. South Carolina certified.
And so you have gone through. You're on your second property now since starting the goat dairy, and your dairy's changed quite a bit. So you had quite a bit of faith in the dairy industry, in the goat dairy industry, and that's kind of what I try to tell people is I'm amazed every time. I'm like, okay, well, I'm going to drive 3 hours to the closest goat dairy, and that's insane to me that nobody is starting this. Like, why is everybody not jumping on the bandwagon with this? And I think it's because people are scared. There's a sense of fear. And when I hear you tell your story, and then I go to your dairy, and you've got literally an area where you walk down, you call it the pit, where you walk down and you're at eye level with the goat's udder. You've invested in all this equipment, these head gates and all that. I'm like, you had some faith in what was going to happen with these goats. Like, you knew that the market that you were going into was a market that needed to be filled. And even here, like, that's how I felt. I can't believe how much of a need there is for it in South Carolina, and nobody's filling it. And I'm just like, it's you can't. There's not even competition between goat dairies because there's so much that people need. Like, there's so many people that need it. Yeah. So it's definitely an industry that I think people, if there is any fear that people have out there as far as going into it, I would definitely get over that very quickly. Just because every goat dairy that I've seen, all it takes is the backbone of the person, and as long as there's somebody that's willing to do the work and learn, and when you fail, start again, then you're going to be successful. The market is there. The market is definitely there.
There's so many people now, and who knows what people are talking about these days, but there's so many people that have the lactose intolerance and they have stomach issues. One thing that dairy goat people have done well is to make people understand that any mammal can live on goat milk. And so whether a person is feeding their infant, whether a person is feeding, we have people that have dogs that are having puppies and they're not eating when they first have their puppies, or they're very pregnant and they're not eating, or they have bad stomachs. It's a healer. I can't tell you how many elderly people come and get goat milk from me, and probably you do too, because they got stomach issues, and it's a real healer. We got into it in the first place,
right?
Because my daughter had stomach issues.
Well, and I never had stomach issues. I was always fine eating ice cream, eating cow's milk. Now I've been on goat's milk for almost 10 years, and when I go to cow's milk, it's a big notice. Like, I'm like, oh, my stomach doesn't feel good. I'm not. It puts you in some type of way. And I've noticed that a lot of other countries, and we touched on this a little bit earlier, most people in other countries are using goat's milk. They're using goat's meat. It's more environmentally friendly. It's more economical. You can put a goat, if somebody has goats in their backyard and they're breeding it every year, you're talking about, and this is awful, not everybody's going to raise goats for meat, but if somebody is going to eat goat meat, you're talking about a goat in the freezer every year and another goat to be milking. And so it's just insane to me that people are having, $10,000 dogs in their backyard and wouldn't have, like, just having a goat or 2 or 3 goats is just absolutely insane to most people's minds. So
what I do know is, because we start a lot of new people, what I do know is there's more people now that are interested in getting into dairy for their family, because you can say, well, you can get milk for your family and proteins of, whether you're doing meat or just the milk, but it's more than that, because goats they drive you crazy sometimes, but they're also very comical. They're very loving. They have unique personalities, every single one of them. And if you tell a person, not only do you want to provide your own nutrition for your family, because you know what's going into it, you know what's coming out, but there's so many kids with so many problems right now. And if you have animals in the backyard, you're already giving them something to do. They can learn relationships on a nonverbal level when they're out there messing with animals that all have different personalities. And when you tell them to go out there and water them, it's life or death.
Right.
You don't water them, they die.
Right.
So it's important that they do that. And if they see one struggling, or if they see one, when the babies are born, can you get them to nurse on mom? Or if you're going to bottle feed them, what a great bonding for the kids to be bottle feeding the babies. I mean, people get really invested in the animals. And you can talk to a person and say, do you want to do this for your family? Because it's a great way to raise your children out there in agriculture. Yes. And let's get back into agriculture. The reason why there's not as many goat dairies is because people don't know anything about agriculture anymore. Right. They don't even know where milk comes from. And I do dairy sheep as well. And people go, I didn't know sheep had milk. And I'm thinking, what does that mean? They have babies, and that's the whole thing, the whole mammal thing, right?
And there's other countries that are like sheep milk is their primary. That's what they're eating sheep milk cheese. They're drinking sheep milk every day, eating sheep meat. It's a common thing. Yeah. And something about the U.S. we've just the cow is the only thing.
Yeah. And a cow is too much for a family. Right. Everyone, we hear a lot of that. Joel Salatin's a big, let's get all you ever need is a cow.
Right.
Can you feed that cow?
Right.
And what are you going to do with all the milk?
And do all you need poop.
And the poop. Oh my gosh, they are the messiest ever.
Yep.
So, and I have cows, so I can say that.
Right.
We milk Jersey cows.
Side note, I really want one of the baby Jersey cows that she has whenever she has babies.
And sheep and goats. And we make products from all three. And I do blended cheeses, and I do, hard cheeses for goat, sheep, or cow.
And so with some of your cheeses, do you make any just cow cheese?
I do a good cheddar.
Okay.
Because that's what people want. And I do a Colby. The Colby Jack is 2 colors, right? You've seen that in the store probably. Yes, yeah. And, it's a, orange or whatever. And they use dyes, and they use all cow milk. Well, what I didn't want to use dyes. I like to do natural stuff. I'm all about the forage. Right. And, so what I did is it takes 2 batches. So I did my goat and I did my cow. And what you do is you layer it in the mold. So you have yellow, white, and it's just a beautiful Colby Jack cheese, and it's all natural. There's no artificial colorings or anything like that, and it's a beautiful cheese.
Right.
That's awesome. I got people, they're still asking about it and want more, and I think I've used it all, and I haven't made any more recently.
That's awesome. So on your farm, you've literally got your goats and your sheep are living together. They're pastured together. And they all come in, like we saw the process.
The sheep.
You had sheep when you first got approved. You were milking sheep. What made you add the sheep onto the goats? So you had the goats. You're milking the goats. What made you get those sheep?
Well, the guy that I got some Sonic goats from had sheep, and I always loved sheep. They're cuddly. They're the most mentioned animal in the Bible, and I'm just fascinated by that. And I just was fascinated with them.
Right.
And they don't have the genetic improvements that goats have. They're just not there.
Yeah.
But in the United States, we have cows, and they've achieved it. Every cow is like identical. You don't have to worry about a genetic improvement. They've got it. They're all made the same, and that's it. Goats, pretty darn good. Now you can get, good genetics and poor genetics and all that, but mostly, their teats are down and they have a good suspensory ligament. Some have better attachments, some have more volume, all that.
Right.
And sheep aren't made the same. And they're getting there, but they're just not there. And so my goal had been making better genetics. And I don't even know how long we've been working on it, but we've had we probably have 10 generations. It doesn't take
of sheep, just
yeah,
of sheep.
Yes. But we've been working on the genetic selection, and we have some amazing milkers now. I have sheep that can out milk a lot of my Nubians.
Oh, geez.
It's really hard to out milk a Saanen.
Right.
Because those girls, they just pump it out like crazy.
So you're on a desert island. It's you and your family. You got to provide milk for them. Sheep or goats?
Well, if it's a desert island.
Well, there's a little bit of forage. There's a bamboo patch in the center.
It's a desert, hot, and all dairy sheep are wool sheep, so there's that issue. And if I'm on the desert island, I probably don't have electricity. So shearing
solar,
is an issue. Solar.
Yeah, solar.
I like the sheep, but what I will tell you that you won't want to hear is that when I take a gallon of goat milk, and you know this, I get a pound of cheese. When I get a gallon of sheep milk, I can get 2 to 3 pounds of cheese. And it is amazing. And I've taught so many people how to make cheese, and when they see the difference, it's amazing. When you make ricotta, and I won national awards for my goat milk ricotta, and I got to tell you, you have to use an acid to get it to flocculate and coagulate at the top. And with sheep milk, you just heat it up, and it just forms. And it's amazing, and it's wonderful. And in Italy, they do all sheep milk ricotta, and that's what they have for breakfast every single day. And it's light, it's fluffy, it's moist, it's wonderful. It's just sweet.
Yeah.
Like
so maybe if somebody's getting it for fluid milk, somebody just wants to drink milk and they need.
I would say goats.
Say goats.
Because the sheep don't make that much.
Okay.
And they have a shorter lactation period. So if your goal is to have milk for your family. And let's talk about the goaty taste. Can we talk about that for a minute?
Yes.
Because I feel like people think it's
That's why
breeds.
people get Nigerians. That's why people get Nigerians.
Yeah, because they say, it doesn't have the goaty taste. But it can. Usually the goaty taste is because someone hasn't put their milk up properly. Or it's their operating procedures. It's the method they use. Are they doing a clean catch?
They've got a bunch of boy goats in there with them.
Why would you do that?
Yes.
That's.
I always tell people they don't need a boy goat. Like I beg people not to get a boy goat. You don't need a boy goat. You don't need, and yet, unless you're a dairy, you don't need a boy goat. Borrow somebody. Get 3 friends.
All right. Borrow a goat. Yes, and people do that. Yep. There is biosecurity issues.
Yes, if you have somebody you can trust. So if you're being a homesteader,
do we even know?
Yeah.
Do they even know?
Do they know? Yeah.
I'm just saying. Just saying.
I hate for people to start that first year and they get that intact buck, and
I agree.
They notice just how bad it smells. I want them to walk in the pen with my bucks and just Jonas and I were in with the bucks today, and I still smell that. So I want them to be around the bucks a lot before they say I'm going to buy an intact buck. Because I've had 2 people that have said, you know what, I can't keep this buck. And get it castrated, get it weathered, and then you can keep it with your girls. But now you got a pet forever because it's unless you're going to eat it, it's just a pet. But yeah, I don't like the first year. You don't need a boy. If anything, get it on the 2nd and 3rd year. But go the first a little bit with just your first girls.
Now, from my point of view, what I tell people is I start them with starter herds and flocks.
Yep.
And so, old school was you get, if you're going to have one, you get a buck and a wether. So that the buck can have a friend. Right. Well, he's a horrible friend. He is a really bad friend for the poor wether, okay? You know what I mean? And people know.
Yep.
So what I tell them is get 2 intact bucks that they're unrelated to each other and unrelated to the girls, and then they can have a closed herd, and that's solving the biosecurity issue.
Right.
And not loan them out. And knowing what's going to happen as they get older, because it doesn't take long for people to know, oh, wow, that's horrible. Make sure you have a remote area that you can put them in that's away from the girls, because the other thing is when you're breeding, the buck effect brings the girls in like that.
Right.
So you want to keep them separate, and for your family, you want to keep them separate.
Right.
And you just have to have enough land to make that happen.
And you're talking, like, I can smell the bucks probably, I'll say, like, you can easily smell them from 100 yards away when they're in season. But, I mean, you can pull up to a dairy goat farm when it's certain times of the year, and you're getting wafts of it if they're within 200 yards of where you are. So, yeah, the people that insist on getting that buck, that's what I always say, get 2 intact, and then just switch them year by year.
Yeah.
So that, Because you can breed back a little bit. Yeah, you can do it. So.
Yeah, because let's say you have all males. Well, gosh, that's another year. Just keep going, and you don't need to keep the males. You can weather them and sell them as pets, sell them as bottle babies.
Right.
You don't need the males. And I think the sooner people can think a little more about not adding a burden to the family, the better they do. Or there are people that will weather them and fatten them up and use them as meat.
Right.
And I think that's an option. A lot of people can't handle that, and you got to get there.
And it takes, and we talked about that extensively because it's the part where I've gotten to. And I eat meat. I was a vegetarian off and on for about 10 years. I've struggled with ethics behind animal husbandry and people raising animals. But I have found that if I'm raising the animal myself and I'm doing the deed myself and I'm doing everything myself, it does not bother me one bit because that animal never felt fear. It was good. And I can eat that meal and I can be totally fine with it. And I'm good with it. We did it with chickens, we did it with pigs, and now we're kind of getting hitting that corner with goats. So I'm curious.
So that's what you do when you raise it for your family, or you can go one step further and you get what's called a meat handler's license, and it's not that hard to attain. You have to have a dedicated freezer or section that this is the meat that you're going to retail. And then they'll create a label at any processing plant. They actually create the label for you, do all the paperwork these days.
Package it, yeah.
And they'll package it and they'll put your name on it and all that stuff. And that's where you go with that. So you decide, are you doing it for your family? And then start that way. Or if you don't want to do it for your family, you can sell young animals lots of different ways and lots of different places, especially goats for certain ethnic markets.
Yep.
And a lot of people don't. The reason why we got a meat handler's license is I knew it was a food group, and I knew it was for meat. But I wanted to make sure that my goat that I loved and adored, even though I knew it was for meat, I wanted to make sure it had a good end, and that bothered me sometimes.
Right.
And I knew when I took them to a processor that they would do it humanely.
There's an inspector there. There's one way that they can do it.
Yeah, they don't do awful things to them.
Yep.
You just have to reach that point.
Yeah.
But that's because we were selling them, and I wasn't always sure if it had a good end. And
right.
That was important to me.
Right, and that's I completely agree, and that's where I'm at. USDA processor, so you can look up a processor, a certified processor. You've got your 2 different options with process, 3 different options. You can process them yourself at home, which only you and your family can eat. You can kill them at your home, and then you take them to a deer processor, which again, only you and your family can eat. Or you can take them to a USDA, you take them alive on the hoof to a USDA approved facility, and then they can package them and you can sell them as meat. And that is something that it's not gonna get freezer burned. As soon as you have it, you advertise that you have it, it's gone. Because there is such a demand for goat meat in the United States.
And you're raising it yourself, and you have whatever you do, let people know. If it's grass-fed, if it's out there pastured and roaming around, people love that. And they love that you're taking care of them, and you know what goes into them. And it's a better quality than anything else you can get.
Right. And just humane. Like, if your family's doing it, they're seeing this goat alive, and they know that the respect for the animal is there. It's kind of like the tale of Charlotte's Web, like how the pig got to live because there was a personality behind him. So yeah, that's something that's really important to me, is knowing the story of the animal before you eat it. I love that. All right, guys, so it's been awesome having Debbie with us. Like I said, go down in the comments below. If there's anything that you'd like to follow up with Debbie and ask her, you can follow her also. We're going to put her channel on here as well. Check out her farm. It's Whispering Pines up in Seneca, South Carolina. And she's been doing this for about 20 years. She's got a herd of Sonnings, Nubians, mini Nubians. What kind of sheep do you have? I never asked that.
East Frisian. They're a dairy
Frisian.
sheep.
Okay. East Frisian dairy sheep. So definitely check her out. If you got a question, find somebody that's doing what you want to do and ask them. Coach you later.